Hello Steelers, and welcome to this video in which I'm going to show you how I built this garden wall attachment for one of my existing bombed out buildings. You can see it here up against the old building, and this was built as part of the Terrain Tober challenge that we had over on Twitter. I've been trying to just basically add to some of my existing buildings, really just some of these very nice, simple, easy little additions, and in this video I'm just going to show you the steps that I took to get this built up. It's very simple, anybody can do it if I can do it, and you can use any of these techniques for any other kind of building that you want to make, or any other kind of terrain. And terrain always makes a table, so it's always worthwhile using it and just trying out some of these techniques. For the base of the garden, I'm using 2mm styrene board, or plastic card as you'll know it. You can get this on eBay or on Amazon or anywhere really. First of all, what I did, I just needed to get the width of the actual garden itself. So I measured it up against the building that I was using, because I'm using it for a specific building, and then just using a steel ruler, just measured it out, and I was able to cut this very simply because it's plastic card with a very sharp knife. Just be careful obviously when you're cutting these things out, and make sure you do measure it correctly in the first place, because that will save heartache and tears later on in your project. And then to get the correct depth of the garden, I actually just laid out the materials I was going to use. In this case, these are small walls by Debris of War. You can get these on the internet. They were very quick to arrive, so definitely worthwhile buying some of these if you can. And these, I think, are resin cast as well. They're very nice little walls. You can see there's quite a lot of detail on them. And again, I just measured up a line really with the pencil just to make sure everything fitted. So again, I wasn't making this too small. You can always make this smaller, so it's better to go a little bit bigger at this point. And then again, just using that very sharp knife, just trim this off, and then you've got your base of your garden. And the house that I'm using has been bombed out, so I was expecting that there's going to be a bit of damage to the garden and the garden wall in particular. Because this stuff is resin, it was quite easy to cut, so I just made some scar lines with the knife. Again, just being very careful, just cut away from your hands, as I'm attempting to do here. And then using some clippers, I was just able to break off a large piece of this. You can see there it's sheared off quite nicely and made quite what looks like quite a messy wrecked wall. So I was going to put this in here so it looked like it was just going to be damaged and bombed out from some of the fighting damage that was going on around it. Using super glue, I then fixed all the walls in place and then just left them to dry. And then once the super glue had dried, I got red brown, I think it's red brown or Hull brown by Vallejo, or whichever brick brown you want to use, and just slopped the paint on basically, just to really get in block colours. I'm doing this because later on I'm going to be adding some other layers, and I just wanted these to be painted immediately before I started doing anything else. So I just worked my way around all the brickwork here, just ensuring everything is covered, probably giving it 2 coats if you need to. But I didn't even bother priming these because I'm kind of using this coat as a primer anyway. So it's up to you if you want to or not. I didn't bother. You can if you want to. Just put a second coat on if you haven't, which is what I did. The next thing to do was to start adding some details, and I wanted some cobblestones in the gardens as well, right in the centre, so it's more like a yard than a garden, I suppose. This is embossed plastic card. You can get this again on eBay or from Amazon. It's what Railway Modelers use for a lot of things. Wargamers seem to forget about it. I use quite a lot of it. It's really good stuff. It's thin enough to cut easily as well, and has a very nice pattern that really takes to dry brushing. So I just wanted to put a couple of cobblestones in the centre of each of these gardens. Again, just to really give them just a little bit of interest. You can make these into paths or any kind of garden feature that you want. For this, because I'm gluing plastic to plastic, I was just using polystyrene cement. This is, I think it's Tamiya's thin polystyrene cement, but you can use whatever you want for this really. If you wanted to use super glue you could, but this is a better bond when it's plastic on plastic, so that's why I'm using it. So you just cover the back of the plastic card, the embossed plastic card, with the styrene cement, and then just put it into place as you see I'm going to do in 1 second here. making sure every part of it is covered. Some of this will squeeze out, so don't worry too much because it will then still create a bond. We're going to create a bond above this anyway later on with some of the other weathering and garden materials. I did this in both of these gardens. As I say, I just wanted something looking just a little bit interesting rather than just having grass in the back garden. This is where I made my first mistake. I started adding Vallejo texture paste to the garden here, just right up against the walls and also to cover up some of the cobbles on the edges. What I should have done is painted the cobbles first of all. It doesn't matter because I covered up any mistakes later on anyway with static grass. But just remember, I think it's probably better at this point to paint the cobbles before you start painting this texture paste on. The texture paste is great. I use this for a lot of scenery. It's going to get covered by static grass anyway, but it's a nice base rather than painting green. You can see here I'm just going over some of the cobbles with this just to break up the shape. Cobblestone areas in the centre of the garden, but you can put as much or as little on as this. Just be careful around the walls because you can go back and paint things, but you don't really want too much of this paste up the walls if you can avoid it. So using a medium-sized brush, just ensure you get right into those nooks and crannies and just be a little bit careful, like I say, around those walls. You can repaint them and you can also scrape this stuff off as well if you want, but you don't really want to be creating work for yourself. As I said, you probably wanted to paint the cobbles before you started doing the texture paste. In this case, I have painted them. I didn't film it, silly of me, but I just used Vallejo Stone Grey, just painted over them. And then once that was dry and all the texture paste was dry, which takes about 24 hours or so to fully dry, I used Seraphim Sepia, the wash by Citadel. This is quite an orangey wash, but I just used this over the cobblestones. We're going to really bring out that colour again with a dry brush after this has dried, but this is quite a nice easy thing. You can see why I should have really done the cobblestones before I did the paste, because I'm there touching the paste. But again, don't worry too much about this stuff. We can cover all this anyway later on with static grass, so just go for it and don't worry about it. Then it was time to dry brush the cobblestones. Again, I've just gone back to the base colour of the Stone Grey by Vallejo. Just getting some of this onto your brush, wipe off as much as possible. Give it a wipe on your painting mat, as you can see I'm doing there, just to make sure you haven't got too much on. And as you can see, it starts to actually bring out the cobblestones once again, but still you can see some of that Seraphim Sepia below, so it looks a little bit like it's a dirty, worn surface. And I was just working my way through this very simply, very easily. This starts to bring them to life. If you want to do another colour over the top, you can do. I left it at just the one colour because that was enough for me. And here I was kind of experimenting. I wanted to be able to see some of the mortar in between the bricks, and it's usually white in most cases for buildings, especially in Western Europe at least. So I'm using Florrie Washer's white. You could probably do the same here with just a really thin down white paint and literally just daubing that onto those bricks over the top. And you can see it starts to settle a little bit in between those bricks. Now, Florrie Washers, you can actually wipe them off once they've dried. You can just reactivate them with a damp cloth and just wipe them off. In this case, I didn't. What I wanted to do was just dry brush over the top. But as I said, this was a bit of an experiment just to see how it worked. And I was actually quite pleased with the end result because it also gives a bit of a worn look to the bricks as well. When the Florrie Washers had dried, I just went back in with Vallejo's Flat Earth and I just cut back in again around the base of the bricks because some of the Florrie Wash had actually fallen and collected around the bottom, so I just basically kneaded things up. And then I also got a slightly lighter brown. I can't actually remember which one this was, but any will do, whichever you think looks good for brickwork. I just gave them a really good dry brushing. I was quite pleased with the overall look by the end of it. It's not perfect, but these things again are not meant to be the Golden Demon winners. These are, they're terrain pieces that to bring a table to life. You're looking at the whole table rather than just the individual piece when it comes to these kind of terrain pieces. Then we're definitely moving into the last part of this build. So I took some undiluted PVA glue, white glue, and just painted this all over the areas that I wanted static grass to go, on the edges as well, as you can see there, and just around it. And this is what I say about we're going to be covering up quite a lot of mistakes with the static grass. So anything that you've made a mess of in the previous points, we're just going to cover them up here, ready for the static grass. And this is the static grass. You can put this on with an applicator if you want. I don't. I just buy big tubs of it and just pour it all together into a box, and I can just sprinkle it on. I find that the stuff stands up relatively naturally anyway if you blow on it, maybe with a hairdryer, or even just blowing on it itself after you've actually sprinkled this stuff all over. But you just make sure that all the areas that you covered in PVA are then covered in static grass. And on a small kitchen towel or similar, or a cloth or something, just tip it over and you will knock all off your excess grass, and you will be left with a really nice looking garden. But obviously at this point as well, make sure everything else that you've done up to this point is dry, because the static grass will just stick to paint or any other washers or anything that you're using. So this is almost the last stage. It's really just detailing after this, and you can see there how it looks after I've knocked off most of the static grass. And the details are really easy to add. These are just tufts. Well, these are flower tufts, but I also added grass tufts as well. You can get these everywhere and anywhere. I buy them off eBay. I think the seller is Tajima1. Well worth getting some. They're very cheap, very, very useful. I will add a couple, as you can see here, in some of the cobblestones, to show where weeds have come up, that kind of thing. Get different sizes of them, different colours of them, just to add a little bit of variety and difference to the different gardens that you're building. They really bring a terrain piece alive, just these tiny little touches. And then, because this is a ruined house, I wanted some of the rubble to be spread about in the garden, just to smash the place up, make it look war-torn. You don't have to do this if your house isn't ruined. You can see I've already added some rubble mix using PVA glue to the broken wall at the top. And I was basically doing exactly the same as I was with the static grass here, but this is a rubble mix that I made myself with various different colours, different chalk pastels, and some ballast and things that I've mixed up over the years from different railway modelling kind of builds. You can probably buy something like this quite easily, but you can easily make it yourself as well. Although I've had mine for such a long time, I've forgotten how I did it, I'm afraid. But again, it's simply adding a lot of PVA to the area and then sprinkling the rubble over the top. And you can see there I've added quite a few lumps of larger rubble as well, just for large bricks and bits of the house that's come down. And then the very, very final thing to do was just to add some weathering powders to the wall. Now these are Revell's weathering powders, but you can get so many different types these days that it's entirely up to you what you use. But these are very, very good. They're very useful. People use them a lot in large-scale military modelling, but I certainly use them on my terrain pieces, just because they add a little bit extra dimension and just make things look a little bit dirtier and used and more lived in. These ones were black, but you can get them in different colours as well. And obviously you can add as little or as much as you want to, wherever you want, and it's entirely up to you. It just really nicely finishes off the piece. I then applied some spray varnish, some Winsor & Newton Professional Artist Matte Spray, which is the best on the market, left it all to dry, and this is how it finished up. You can see it here against the back of the house that it's specifically built for. You can see how it fits in quite well with the rubble that I'd already put on that house as well. And just as a terrain piece on its own, it was quite a nice easy build, only a few stages. Anybody can do this very simply, and it looks very effective on the tabletop. As I say, you're basically just bringing alive your tabletop by adding terrain to it. A lot of people do forget about terrain, so it's well worth just having a think about. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've learned something from it. If you have, please let me know in the comments. Either way, please stay tuned for more terrain builds at some point in the future when I get round to them. Have a look at the rest of the videos on the channel as well, and please leave a comment, a like and a subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you very much for watching.